Donald Trump says he wants to make America great again, but in his quest to shake things up, is he in fact pushing the United States too far away from the rest of the world? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. President Trump's strategy is to get rid of any deal he believes is a bad one for America. Sort of makes sense, really, doesn't it? But it has left the US increasingly isolated from the global community. And for the world's largest economy, it is an unfamiliar situation. Could it ultimately prove worthwhile or not for America?
America first.
I am always going to put America first.
America first. America first. Make America great again.
A promise to prioritize the needs of America and the American people. And a slogan for the Trump administration's foreign policy. But a U-turn for a country that has for decades dominated global politics. Has Donald Trump turned his back on the world stage? He says America first. Could it in fact mean America alone? It started with scrapping the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
The TPP would have been a tremendous disaster for our country.
A trade deal 10 years in the making between 11 countries, aimed at opening up Asian markets to be able to trade more freely with the United States. Now Trump is threatening to withdraw from the North American Free Trade Agreement, which brings together the economies of North America. Trump says it has devastated manufacturing in parts of the US. He wants to reduce steel imports and has threatened to impose tariffs, largely aimed at China.
We can no longer tolerate these chronic trade abuses, and we will not tolerate them.
A move critics fear could do more harm than good. A rapidly growing economy has seen China step out of America's shadow and become a pretender to the global economic throne. Some analysts say the dragon economy will come to eclipse that of the States next year. And it's not just trade where President Trump is going it alone. He has pulled out of the Paris Agreement, making the US the only country to be left out in the cold on the issue of global warming. The America First approach has spread to immigration too. With a wall planned along the Mexico border,
we have some bad hombres here and we're going to get them out.
And travelers from Muslim-majority countries facing open hostility from the president, America is looking increasingly inward-facing. But experts say it would take a lot to undo America's legacy as a global superpower. China may have embraced globalization, but growth is slowing, economic inefficiencies abound, and reform of the service sector has been slow. The United States is still the world's policeman and has substantial clout in the foreign policy arena, still holding significant sway within major international bodies from NATO and the UN to the IMF and the World Bank. And with the Senate having just signed off on a $700 billion defense bill, its military might won't be diminishing anytime soon. Trump's unconventional presidency might be disrupting the international order. But what will it mean for the land of the free and the home of the brave? Will Donald Trump's policy be a blip on the reputation of a powerful nation? Or perhaps the beginning of a new US global strategy?
And I'm joined at the round table by the former worldwide Vice President of Republicans Overseas, that is Jan Halper-Hayes. We also have James D. Boyce, American history and politics specialist, and North American political analyst Lindsay Newman. Warm welcome to you all. I had decided just to be the grey man today, no red or blue, but this last-minute replacement is a blue pen. I promise you there's no political leaning with that. So, James, let me come to you first of all. Sure. Do you think Donald Trump has increased America's standing in the world?
I can't say that I believe he has. Neither do I believe, however, that he is taking the United States away from a global role. I think what he is doing is repositioning the United States and continuing a role of repositioning the United States, which we've seen going back some 25 years. When Bill Clinton became president, he talked about focusing upon the Pacific region. He didn't visit Europe until the first year of his presidency was up, and then he went to NATO. Barack Obama talked about a Pacific pivot, and I think you can see with Donald Trump a recognition that that's the future direction of travel for the US, hence his recent trip in that direction and his warm relations with the Chinese leadership.
Lindsay, is he isolationist?
Well, we have to think about what isolationism means in the context of a global world economy, nuclear capability, the ongoing threat of cyber attacks. When we think of isolationism from a U.S. perspective, that really takes us back to the interworld period between World War I and World War II, when the U.S. retrenched from European affairs. You know, the idea that an ocean can separate the U.S. from the world is an idea of the past. He's not an isolationist. He is pursuing America First policy. That doesn't mean no deals. It means no bad deals.
But does that reduce his standing, America's standing in the world?
What we're seeing is that relationships, when he travels, when he was just in China, he's receiving a warm welcome. Relationships between the U.S. and the rest of the world have formed over centuries. So there's no erosion that we're seeing at this point. Okay,
Jan, former Vice President worldwide of Republicans overseas. You've seen over the past, I think it's 2013, you said, you started that job. Over the last 4 years, with a bit of a break, you've seen what people everywhere think of the United States. Do you think their opinion of the US as represented by Donald Trump has gone down or gone up?
I don't think that it has necessarily gone up, but it actually went down from Barack Obama's time. It has been declining, not just since Trump came in. And actually, if you think about it, I think countries are split. Some actually share his ideas of nationalism, and some are very much of the globalist perspective.
He is very, very different to other American presidents when it comes to foreign policy, isn't he? Either because he's got a long-term game in mind and we just don't quite understand it, or because he doesn't quite understand it either.
Well, you know, I always find it so interesting. Either he understands it or he doesn't understand it, or he said something on Monday, but he changed his mind on Thursday. The fact is that he is very much for bilateral agreements and not multilateral agreements. Now, the globalists feel that the multilateral agreements brought simplification, but has simplification really helped things? I mean, what he wants to do is figure out deals that work for country to the United States and back.
You see, bilateral agreements imply that there's a benefit perhaps for both sides. But if you're dealing with America first, there isn't necessarily this quid pro quo that whoever's on the receiving end of the deal is going to get a fair crack of the whip. Perhaps.
Yeah, that's one of the great challenges, I think. When you look at Donald Trump's business dealings in the past, he very much likes to talk about winning, and that's fine. And he talked on the campaign about we're going to get so used to winning, you're going to get sick of it. The problem is that when you have a binary system like that, that suggests someone's going to lose. And if you're having a negotiation, either on a human level or a national level, you don't want to put other countries in that position where one of you is winning and one is losing. Clearly what Donald Trump sees in many of these deals is the fact that he feels that the US has been negotiating from a weak position and wants to renegotiate them. Utterly understandable, but so many of those deals have relatively recently only been enacted. The Paris Treaty, for example,
the climate
Iranian deal, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people now looking back and going, well, hang on a second, 5 minutes ago, this is where the US was, and now we've got a 180 deal situation. Where is the United States going to be tomorrow?
Yeah.
Well, but see, we're talking about it from an ideological standpoint. And in 2013, Pew Research asked not only the think tank people that deal with foreign policy, but over 2,000 people, how do you feel about America always going around and saving the world rather than dealing with the problems at home? And at that point in 2013, 53% said, you know, we're done. We need to focus on the problems that exist in America, and we don't need to go out there and save the world.
Absolutely, and that's not a new position. Let's be honest, going back to when Bill Clinton was elected in '92, he actually wanted to talk about being a domestically focused president and could get actually very, very little done and got dragged kicking and screaming into dealing with the Balkans after all. So this idea that America is attempting to reposition itself after the Cold War is still, I think, a relationship it's trying to come to terms with, not only internally, but internationally as well, I think.
Lindsay, jump in if you want to, but I have a question here, which is that when you have somebody who's operating for the benefits of his own country, and of course most leaders should do that, and do that, but only perhaps for the interests of his own country, then countries with which that person is dealing tend to think, well, there's a better way for us to go. You know, India and China and Russia and Brazil and all of those countries might think, well, why do we need the United States as much as we did? Is there a sign that America, if not isolating itself, is being marginalized to some extent?
Well, I think what's being said here is that he said, you know, multilateral agreements is not the way of the future for him. They want to focus on bilateral deals. But we just look at his recent trip to China. He came back and the White House immediately announced that there was $250 billion in deals between the U.S. and China as a result of those meetings. So I thought
they were promissory agreements.
Well, certainly.
In other words, you know, we'd like to do them perhaps.
But the point there is it's no different than every other president who's gone to foreign countries and come back with deal making. And that is what we're continuing to see. He is a deal maker in chief.
Well, there's something else here, and everything is looked at with Trump as black and white, either or. Is he an isolationist or is he a globalist? And Trump happens to see the world from a duality perspective. He doesn't see it as black and white. I mean, where people think that he might agree with one of his cabinet secretaries and then a week later contradict them. Part of that is his negotiation strategy, is to put the different aspects on the table so that you find the middle ground.
Which leads me perhaps to this, because I should explain that Jan was vice president worldwide of Republicans abroad, but is now part of the transition team. A year after the election, they are still transitioning to some extent. You say that's not unusual, but what do you think about the way he's dealing with the State Department, since we're talking about foreign policy? Wall Street Journal says he's restructuring it with a chainsaw.
Well,
are you part of that?
No, I'm not part of that. I'm part on making government great and making government work, and I want to take a lot of the costs out of government. That's what I'm focused on. But in terms of that, I wouldn't use a chainsaw, but he also is not really focused on America's soft power. And a lot of very seasoned diplomats are no longer at the State Department.
Empty desks, apparently.
Empty desks on purpose. I mean, most presidents have 4,000 political appointments to make. Trump has made a little over 1,000 so far. Now, in the Obama, in the Clinton, and in the Bush administration, they didn't make it till 4,000. They made it to about 2,500 to 3,000 after the first year. I think that there is a very clear strategy to innovate government, and in doing that, yes, they are restructuring, looking at ways to eliminate certain aspects, and there's a risk. He went to Asia, and that Asia desk hadn't been filled, and so the foreign policy, the clear policies of the Trump administration about Asia were not spelled out.
A clear strategy, but does it appear to you two to be that, or is it simply sort of a naivety in thinking you can get by with just a few people, when in fact it's very complicated?
I think one of the challenges here is, and why this gets distorted, is that the president, by his own admission, is constantly blaming the Democrats for not basically approving the people he's nominated, and yet we're already hearing here that there is a strategy not to nominate. Which is it, effectively? It can be.
But see, there you're going with either or again.
Well,
you're going, it's either
I'm
this
just
or it's
the president's
that.
Words, if you forgive me.
But see, that's the other problem, is that people take him literally and not seriously, and they don't connect the dots. They don't look at all the different aspects that involve in making it a whole. The fact of the matter is that he has nominated and appointed and put forth the nominations for some of the most important positions. And yes, the Democrats have very much stalled, just as much as the Republicans did that when Obama came in. That's part of the political play. We can't blame Trump for anything like that. And why do we need such big government? I mean, that to me is one of the most important questions, because that's our taxpayer money paying for projects that the duplication could save over $1 trillion. One
of the
I must allow Lindsay to come in at this point.
What Jen is speaking to is this idea that we need to keep in mind these are still early days. Whether you agree with what Jan's saying or not, these are still early days. I think the seminal work on the Obama foreign policy was the Obama Doctrine Atlantic article that came out in 2016, 7 years into his presidency. But what I think, going back to the original question of isolationism, what often gets labeled as isolationism is actually a tactic that the Trump administration is using in its America First policy. So threatening to walk away from the table, threatening to withdraw from deals is a strategy to push the negotiations towards his ideal policy position.
And
you're
absolutely
building
right.
the wall.
Please make a point, then I'd like to ask.
You're absolutely right, because if we just take NATO as an example, throughout the campaign, oh, NATO's obsolete, NATO's obsolete. What he was really ticked off about was that America was carrying 73% of the costs. Now, 5 countries, at least, have ponied up what they're supposed to pony up. And then he gets criticized for saying he's willing to support NATO. What he really wants to do is he wants to fix those things, and if he doesn't raise the issues, which sometimes to some people are extremes, then they're not going to identify all the different aspects of the problem.
Jan's talking about a deliberate strategy to reduce the number of bureaucrats, if you like. But in a sense, perhaps what you need to do is stock up on experienced people at somewhere like the State Department, because it is a much more complicated world than it was under Reagan. There is no single adversary, as there was like the USSR. We have ISIS, we have all sorts of cyber warfare. You need much more, but you need to know the right way of doing it. And has he chosen the right way?
Well, I think that one of the challenges is that, there's no doubt about it, that it's not unusual. In fact, it's very typical that these administrations take anywhere between 12, 18 months, anything up to 2 years to get fully kitted out, for example. But there has been, I think, a deliberate attempt, as Jan rightly points out, not to hire in certain positions. And on occasion, that leaves him feeling rather exposed. When Theresa May, for example, first visited as Prime Minister, he was the first to admit, crikey, I got the British Prime Minister coming to talk about trade, and I don't think he had a Commerce Secretary at that point approved by the Senate. And so the challenge is when you've got a president who's not experienced in politics and he has not surrounded himself because of some of these appointments, it just further exacerbates a sense of I think, an uncertainty about where this president is going and quite what he wants to achieve that perhaps confounds the rest of the world, and perhaps he does have a master plan, but it's not always apparent what that is.
Can I throw something out here?
Yeah, go ahead.
We have a limited amount of time,
Yes.
Jan. Stephen Sistanovich, who's from the Council of Foreign Relations, says, for Trump, American policy was supposed to serve only American interests. And you might say, that is obvious. But isn't that dangerous, perhaps, for the rest of the world? Because I want to look at this from an outside perspective. Here we are in London. Is that possibly dangerous for other, not everybody, but other people?
Dangerous. I mean, there's certainly risks involved in a strategy that involves an American first policy. The risk is that some other country comes along and fills in that gap, such as, we're seeing regional powers taking priority in the Middle East and whatnot. But dangerous, I would throw that back to, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I would ask also for clarification in terms of danger. I mean, at the moment, we are in a relatively straightforward era. We're not in the Cold War, for example, where one mistake from the Trump White House could lead to obliteration by the Soviet Union. It's concerning with what's going on with regard to North Korea. But of course, Trump would rightly point out, say, well, look, we've tried various approaches over the last 20, 25 years under a variety of Democrat and Republican presidents. They've not worked. So it's time for something new. And I think there's something to be said for that to some extent.
In 1999, Trump was on Meet the Press, the political show in America, with Tim Russert, who was revered as one of the top political commentators. At that point, he was highlighting the issues with North Korea. He highlighted those problems, and that's what he's dealing with today. But dangerous, some people say that it's making America weaker and it's hurting the world. The fact is that I don't think you use the word dangerous. What the issue is that people have counted on America to be there. And now they might have to fend for themselves, and they might not be prepared to fend for themselves if America isn't going to step up to the plate. But let me add, he hasn't started any wars. He's stepped in and increased defense to help the Afghanistan government. He has returned certain cities from ISIS to Iraq. So he's making some progress in certain ways that he considers important.
Well, you could say the Iraqis have returned certain cities in Iraq to Iraq, but perhaps my use of the word dangerous was the wrong word. You all seem to think I chose unwisely, perhaps uncertain.
I think what we need to wait for is that the American government is required by Congress to produce a national security strategy document. That, by all accounts, is underway at the moment. If Trump publishes it on the timescales which is being suggested, he will be the first president to do so within the first year of his tenure. They usually take up to 2 years to draft. They're meant to come out every 12 months. They've been coming out every term. I think in the next 6 months, when that document's released, we'll have a far greater understanding about what the administration's thinking is. And at that point, we'll be far better placed, I think, to understand exactly what it is that this president and his administration wants to achieve.
Because in our report, we mentioned the fact that $700 billion had been agreed for defence spending, and I said to you, do you think that's going to be needed? You said yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Militarily, or as a sort of a warning?
No, militarily, because Obama just absolutely, his goal was to disintegrate the military. I mean, 15 of the top military people were pushed out by the Obama administration. Money has not been given. The amount of the equipment, the quality of the equipment is so poor that if, in fact, America needed to defend itself or to go in and defend another country, there is a problem because things are so old and not working.
Let's go back to Obama 2009, and he reached out to the Muslim world. But nothing came of it. His speech in Cairo 2009, he made great promises, but nothing changed. So perhaps, in a sense, for Trump to be who he is refreshing.
Yeah, it must be said. I mean, I think that was, I remember watching that speech and getting my students to watch it. And I thought we were watching a groundbreaking moment.
Me too.
And, I think that even Obama's greatest supporters, I think, would come away feeling, well, what was actually achieved. Many people started referring to it as the third term of George W. Bush. They were so disappointed with it. But again, I think that speaks a lot to this idea that there are continuing American interests, and whoever is president needs to protect and defend them. The extent to which Obama did, the extent to which he was able to succeed in that part of the world is clearly very debatable. And even when you look at things like the withdrawal from Iraq, that had already been instigated by W before he left office. And again, that reach out to the Muslim world, which I think so many people had so many hopes for, simply failed to materialize.
Yeah, and the disappointment that left behind in the Middle East is palpable. Lindsay, you might pick me up on my choice of words here, but I mean, are we looking at a man who has method in his madness when it comes to the rest of the world, or madness in his method?
Well, there's certainly a strategy. I mean, the America First strategy is to protect American interests, to protect national security in strong deal-making, negotiate from a position of strength. And so he has been clear in that statement. I think what's interesting when we speak of the great speech in 2009 in the Middle East is that we're not seeing a regional focus. So even President Obama had the pivot towards Asia at the end of his presidency. What Trump is doing now is meeting bilaterally with leadership and being part of the conversation in that way. So even just now, when they had the speech, the summit on Sochi, where the U.S. wasn't invited to the Syria conflict negotiations, he made sure to reach out to the stakeholder level to make sure that the U.S. interests were being communicated.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of the program. It's flash pass, I have to say, but I had one note to put to you towards the end is, what will it take for the USA not to be a superpower any longer? Your thoughts on that, Jan?
What will it take
for the US no longer to be a superpower?
I'm not sure that I can answer that question.
So you think it's going to remain a dominant or the dominant world force?
I do for now, yes. I mean, countries still count on us.
And Trump makes no difference to that, or does he increase the chances of America's power waning?
Obama was the one that had our power wane. I think that Trump is a pragmatic problem solver. And if there are problems to be dealt with around the world that serve both America and the rest of the world or those countries, then he will definitely step in, as he's already proven to do so.
Is he going to prove to be the president that presided over America no longer being, in quotes, a superpower? Regard that how you wish, whether it's economically or militarily. Lindsay first.
These issues ebb and flow, and you know, that's a question for, I mean, that's really a big long-term question that is going to be hard for us to answer.
With 70 seconds to go on the program, okay. Give it your best shot. Think of it while I ask James.
Right, I think people have been talking about American hegemonic decline since at least the 1970s, and they've been proven wrong time and time again, quite frankly. We are clearly seeing an interesting time period with Donald Trump as president, but people said very similar things when Ronald Reagan became president, and 8 years later on, he was strolling through Red Square with his new pal, Mikhail Gorbachev. So I think what we need to do is see the release of this new grand strategy document, and then see through the test of time where we lead to.
The most fascinating times of your career so far when it comes to US presidencies?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's no question. The election and its aftermath.
And did you think we'd be where we are 12 months on?
Where are we?
I think that's the best answer of the lot. Where are we? It's a question we could ponder for a very long time. Thank you so much for coming on to Roundtable. Today we've been talking about America's role in the world as put out by the new president 12 months into his presidency, Donald J. Trump. For one moment I thought perhaps we'd left Lindsay speechless. He's left Donald Trump. That is a lot of people speechless around the world the last 12 months. But interesting, as Lindsay put it, absolutely fascinating. I hope you've enjoyed the program, enjoyed having you on. From all of us on Roundtable, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.